Okay.
Recording in progress. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
And also, just a suggestion, if you want, you can also type questions into the chat, and we can keep an eye on those, and then Julianne can look at the chat and address questions at that point as well. So either through the chat or at the end over your microphone, we can handle both.
Okay, and Julianne, I'm going to spotlight you for everyone. So your lovely face is what we see.
Okay. Hi, I'm Julianne Bramson, and it's weird just looking at me, so I'm going to make it so I can see at least some of you. I want you to know that this class is mainly for you to ask me questions. So I'm going to do a brief introduction, talking about dyes, and show some examples of fabrics that I have dyed. And then if anything comes up, and if you say, how do I dye this or whatever, I want you to think of your questions. Annie, I'm not sure, did you send out the little handout thing that I sent? Okay, so if you, that has a lot of reference material in it, but I just want you all to know that if any of you have a question about where do I get this dye, or you mentioned that, please just send an email. I'll do full follow-up, because I love to dye fabric. I love to dye my hair, obviously. I just think it's so much fun to change the color of things, and I have lots of different ways that I do it. And I'm sorry you're looking at my very messy studio, but I want to share everything I know, as much as I can. And I think when Annie asked me about this class, she said, oh, could you, do a little 1-hour tutorial? And I'm like, 1 hour? I could talk about dye for 10 days. So, hopefully you won't be too bored. So I'm going to do a screen share if I can. And I have a little PowerPoint, which hopefully will work. Start broadcasting. Okay, so okay, that's fine. I just need to. Okay, how do you find the? I had it up. There it is. Okay, go to application. There we go. Okay, so question, are you seeing the slide presentation? Or are you just seeing me looking awkward?
No, in fact, you're frozen at the moment.
Ah, okay. So
there you are. Okay. The wonders of modern technology.
I know, and it's always a little different, and Zoom keeps changing things.
We see a screen broadcast.
Yes, and it's
screen.
Okay, here, let's try it this other way. And I'm sorry, Microsoft SharePoint, Dropbox.
Well, it seems like every time they try to improve a computer program, they mess it all up and we can't figure it out again.
Yes. Okay, let's get rid of these other things.
So I can tell an Easter specific joke.
Okay.
What do you get when you pour boiling water down a rabbit hole?
What?
You get hot cross bunnies.
Oh.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Very good. Very good.
Okay.
How you doing, Julianne?
I'm, trying to make it work.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
everything on your screen. Okay, yes. Let's just do this.
I have more.
Telling jokes.
What do Frosty the Snowman and Attila the Hun have in common?
What's that?
Their middle name.
Ah ha ha.
Womp, womp, womp.
You are sharing screen.
Okay, yes, but okay, turn off center stage. Share device on. Okay, why? Wow, that's really weird. I just want to share my slide presentation.
Did you have it up first?
I did. It's up.
Huh.
It's there. I mean, if I can go to it.
Okay, there's a computer screen. I think we're
Okay, so
seeing
you
your-
can see my screen? Oh, good.
I can
Okay.
see the your laptop, I think.
Yeah, my iPad screen. Okay, good. Then I'll just pull it up again. And you get to see the ugliness of pulling it up.
That's all right.
PowerPoint. And start slideshow. You would think. Okay, do you see die to sew now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yay. Okay, good. Okay, so I don't see any of you. I just see my presentation, which is very disorienting. So you'll just have to tell me if things don't make sense. Anyway, so the first thing that's important if you're going to dye fabrics to sew them. Okay, why? No. Presenter view, yes. No, okay, cancel, okay, fine. Okay, so the first thing you need to notice is that your fabrics will come from the fabric store with a little bit of a finish on them. And that finish is so it looks good in the fabric store. But it's just part of the finishing process when the fabric is woven and or dyed before it's put on the bolt and sent to you. And often that, and almost always that finish will restrict the fabric's ability to absorb water. And when we are dyeing fabrics, water is the mechanical vehicle that gets the dye into the fibers. So it's really important to have the fabric be available to accept dye. So that's the long way of saying you got to wash your fabric before you can dye it. So any fabric that you have that you want to dye, it needs to be able to be washed. And I often, there's this term that dyers use called, and now I'm blanking on what it is, scouring your fabric. And usually, especially if you're buying fabrics that are prepared to be dyed, a full scour, which is boiling with soap and soda ash for 30 minutes, is often not necessary. So what I do is I use the hottest setting in my washing machine that the fabric can support, and a little bit of soda ash and a little bit of textile detergent. And textile detergent isn't really necessary. You can use any kind of mild detergent, but just use a small amount. You don't want a lot of detergent in there getting in the way, and certainly no fabric softener. You can use fabric softener at the end after you have finished dyeing your fabric, but don't use it at the beginning. It will get in the way of fabric penetrating. So, and where do you get soda ash or washing soda? You can buy it at pool supply stores or Ace Hardware. They call it washing soda. And then the textile detergent, Dharma Trading Company has it. But like I said, you can also use like just a little bit of Dawn dish soap, but very small amount, because too many bubbles in the washing machine is bad. so most people think about dyeing as bending over a pot with boiling liquid and stirring for hours and hours. And that's certainly a method of dyeing. We call tub dyeing any type of immersion technique. And there are many, including low water immersion techniques, which is a really great way to get a more mottled dye. It's not perfectly even in the color penetration, but it can look really nice, and it can be a great way to dye fabric and many pieces of fabric. My friend and I did 50 pieces of cotton for a quilting class we were taking in a couple of days by using the low water immersion method, which is pretty fun. And if you want to know how to dye quilting cotton, I can tell you what book we used. And it was a lot of work, but we have a nice stack of really pretty fabrics. But you can also, I'll do a little demo. You can also use just a small container and a small amount of water, and just move it around a little bit. The key to even color is to pre-wet the fabric, and that will give you a more consistent overall color tone. If you've ever used RIT dye in your washing machine, you can get really fantastic results with a top loading washing machine, 1 bottle of dye, and pre-wetting your fabric. If you have a manual washing machine, it's even easier. You can get the fabric wet, stop the process, take your fabric out, add the dye, start it up again to get it all mixed up, stop again, put your fabric back in, start the process, set your timer for 20 minutes, go back and reset your washing machine before it rinses, so that you get a full hour of the fabric in the washing machine before it does the rinse and spin. I have dyed many pieces of fabric this way. It does not hurt your washing machine. You do need to clean the white plastic parts of it as quickly as possible with a cloth with maybe a little bleach on it, just to be sure you don't stain it. And I finally had to get rid of that manual washer when it rusted out. And I now have a top loading high efficiency washing machine. And I've dyed in it a few times, but it's not as easy. And it's not as easy to just stop it. But it does have a long wash cycle, so I can use that. Let's see, we'll move on. So the dyes that I use for silk, wool, and nylon fabrics are Color Hue, which is instant set. I'm going to do a little quickie demo.
I only need to really listen to this.
Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you fine.
Okay, good.
Whoever can, everyone please check and mute your mics.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can mute everybody.
No, it's okay. It almost helps me to have a little feedback, so I know you're there.
Okay.
It's all right. Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm not talking to the air because I can't see you either. It's weird. Okay, so my favorite dyes for silk and wool. So Color Hue is great. I'll do a demo of that. Jacquard acid dyes. If any of you recall the blue dress that's on the cover of my book, that was done with Jacquard acid dye sapphire color, which they still have. You add a little bit of vinegar, that's the acid in the acid dye, and you can do it in a washing machine or just any kind of tub. Hot water is not required. They are heat set, but the way it's done is you do the dye process in cold, and then in the dryer is your heat setting. RIT dyes, which sometimes get a bad rap, but they're really, really useful for home use. They're a multi-purpose dye, which means they have dye powder in them for both cotton, linen, and rayon fabrics, and then also silk and wool. They don't dye anything perfectly, but they do dye almost everything. So especially if you have a garment or a piece of fabric that's a blend, RIT dyes can be really helpful because they will strike on almost every fiber. The only fiber they don't strike on is pure polyester. They do make a RIT for polyester. And I will say that dyeing polyester with any dye requires boiling on near boiling temperatures and at least 30 minutes of immersion, and you do need to stir during that time. So dyeing polyester is not my favorite thing to do, and I only do it upon great need. So what that means is any garment that you have purchased, the RIT will dye the fabric if it's a natural fiber, or some even nylon will dye. But usually the thread is polyester, and polyester thread is going to stay pretty white. It might take a tint of color, but it'll stay pretty pale. And then Jacquard makes an eye dye and they make a version for silk and a version for fiber, for cellulosic fibers. And Jacquard also makes a polyester eye dye. But it's the same thing as the 30 minutes of boiling. There's no getting away from that. And then fiber reactive dyes will work on silk and wool and also all the cotton things. And then indigo, which is a mechanical dye versus a chemical dye, works on pretty much anything. It's amazing, except polyester. I don't know why, because maybe the polyester is just the water doesn't go in it. So there's no mechanical method for the dye to get in there. And then oddly, food coloring and Kool-Aid, which is basically food coloring, the packets where you have to add the sugar. So you don't want to get the ones that have the sugar in it, because that would be a sticky mess. But you can use it to dye silk and wool and nylon. So any nylon slips or bras or things, if you want them to be dyed to match a garment, you can use, in a pinch, you can use food coloring. Okay, so one of the things I love about color hue is it's great for silk and wool. It works a little bit on rayon, but it's much less vibrant color. There's no heat setting, so when it's dry, you're done. I mean, you're done. There's nothing. It's just there. It's amazing. The negative of color hue is, aside from the red shades, it's a little dull. It's not super bright. You can't get very, very dark black or brown. You can get pretty good medium tones, but not dark tones at all. Jacquard acid dyes, if you are dyeing silk or wool and you want it to be a color, so that's the way to go. They are designed specifically for silk and wool. They strike on those fibers beautifully. You use acid in the dye process, and that acid supports the fiber. Silk and wool is happier in a more acidic environment. So a little bit of vinegar, or if you don't like the smell of vinegar, you can actually use citric acid, which Dharma sells as well. And you can use your washing machine, especially if you can set it for a longer cycle, at least an hour. They're very consistent and beautiful shades. So I used the sapphire blue, as I mentioned before, for the body of the dress. And then I used color hue to tint the hem of the dress. And if you've seen this dress in person, you'll notice that the hem is just barely darker than the main body. And that's because the sapphire kind of, the term I used is the parking lot was full. There was no more room in the fabric for more dye to go in. And so even though I saturated the hem of this dress multiple times with the darkest color of the color hue I could get, I just wanted to spray it on. It only struck a little bit. This photo makes it look like it's darker, but it's really quite subtle. You can see in this picture that the hem is just a little bit darker than the body of the dress.
I still dream about that dress.
Many people have asked me to make them a dress, and I say my standard price is $5,000 because it was lots of work and 40 hours just beating the hem. So
It's worth every penny of that.
and I'm not sure I would even do it for $5,000 now. Anyway. So a quick and easy plug for RIT fabric dye is that it's easy to use. You can buy it almost anywhere. The liquid version means you don't have to deal with trying to get a powdered dye, fully mixed in. You can use just a little or the whole bottle. It has a lot of benefits. My friend Ruth uses RIT dye in the powder form for an ice dye process. And if you are interested in giving that a go, I can send you her written instructions on how to do that. I'm a bit of a dye snob. So when I do ice dye, I use fiber reactive dyes from Dharma because they're pure. They don't have any other dyes mixed in them. And salt is used as an assist. It helps the water penetrate the fabric better. So Jacquard eye dye, yeah, I'm just going to go quickly through these in case you're not interested, and that way we can get on to demos. Jacquard eye dye is really great. It comes in a packet that's water dissolvable, which is fantastic because powdered dye is not healthy to breathe in. I mean, any powder you don't want to breathe it in. So you want to use a mask. But of course, we're all very familiar with wearing masks now, so it's not a problem. I use a mask while I'm dealing with powder, and then I don't need it anymore because it's not really dangerous and it doesn't penetrate the skin. You just don't want to breathe in the powder. But because Jacquard eye dye comes in that little pouch, you never have to deal with the powder of it. So you can put the pouch right in your water and the pouch dissolves in the water and it mixes in immediately. So, which is great.
Julie, we have a question real quick.
Yes.
Do you have, and I'm not sure if you answered it, do you have to add vinegar to the Jacquard green label to dye silk?
Yes. Yeah. It says right on the instructions to add some vinegar, and it will say how much, but I usually just put like a half a cup for a whole, like a washer load, half cup to a cup. And the smell of the vinegar, once the fabric is completely washed and rinsed and dried, you shouldn't smell the vinegar anymore. Vinegar is volatile, so it will off gas. If you just hang it up, it goes away, the smell. Did that answer the question? Okay, so for
Gina, if you want to unmute and continue to ask, did Julie and answer your question?
Yeah, that answered it. I was just in your notes, you talk about the Jacquard acid dye and the eye dye, and the one that Dharma had recommended for me is called the green label. So I wasn't sure if that was different from the ones you were talking about.
I'm not as familiar with the specific green label, but if it's specific for silk, they may have added it in. So I would just check the instructions for that particular dye.
Okay.
Yeah, I can look it up though. And the other thing about Dharma is if you have any question about the products they sell, they are very good about answering questions on the phone. They are very helpful. If they don't know, they'll take your info and have someone who does know call you back. And
great,
you can also, yeah, they're great. You can also pester me, but they know more than I do. And then if you want to play around with indigo, the quickest and easiest way to wander into indigo and get stuck there, and then you'll be like me, so you've been warned, is the Jacquard Indigo tie-dye kit. And it's everything you need to do a 5-gallon bucket with indigo. It is pre-reduced indigo, which is synthetic. So if you don't want to use synthetic dyes, if you only want to do natural dyes, I'm not sure I have the reference. There's a place in Tennessee selling instant indigo, but it's all from natural dyes, which is really amazing. So just let me know and I'll look up that reference. And I'm blanking on the name of it, of course. Anyway, the other thing to know about indigo is that if you're dyeing silk and wool, indigo, the process of reducing the indigo so that the vat, it's kind of a magical process, but it requires a high pH, and silk and wool prefer a slightly more acidic environment. So neutral is 7, silk and wool prefers 4, 5, 6, 5 or 6 or whatever, a slightly more acidic environment. So it's not happy when it does the indigo. And so as a result, when I'm done dyeing silk and wool with indigo, I soak it in a bucket with some water and some vinegar or citric acid and neutralize that high pH before I wash my fabrics and use them. If you don't do that, sometimes you will get some damage to the fabric. These are just my quick tips for indigo. They should be in your handout. And none of this makes sense unless we're actually dyeing indigo. So I'll move on. And these are the people I have learned from about indigo. I've been studying indigo for over 10 years, and I'm sure I have lots more to learn. So my favorite dyes for cotton, linen, and rayon are the Jacquard brand of Procyon MX fiber reactive dyes. Soda ash is required. It activates the dye. And the great thing about that is these dyes are shelf stable in powder form for years and years and years. They're totally stable. So you can have a nice little stash of dyes and not worry that they will go bad on you. However, once you mix it with the soda ash, you have about 20 minutes to an hour to use the dye. And what happens is the dye will react to the water instead of in your fabric. And you want it to do its reaction in your fabric. So it's kind of, it's like the timer is on once you mix the soda ash in. So one of the dyes you can buy is a tulip one-step dye that has a bottle with the powdered dye and soda ash already in there. So all you have to do is add water, mix it up, and get going. It's very quick. For Jacquard eye dye, they recommend that you add salt when you do immersion dye with it. And that's what it's designed for, is immersion dye, because it comes in that little water dissolvable packet. And the same with Rit dye, you add salt. And then of course, indigo works on everything. Ways to use dyes. So low water immersion, there's that book, Ice Dye, Batik, and then of course tie-dye. Because we don't just want solid colors, right? Because if you wanted just a solid color, wouldn't you just buy the fabric? Unless you want to match something. So here's a big piece of fabric that I did with Ice Dye. It's pretty wild, but fun. So there are methods of dyeing, and you can see my garden back there. There are methods of dyeing very large pieces of fabric, which is great if you're going to make a dress out of it. Here, let's see. You know what? I'm going to move faster. So shibori is a whole nother world of things. Just going to show a few quick photos. And so here's a dress that I dyed using shibori method. So I bought 3 different linen fabrics and made a bias cut dress with them, knowing that it was all going to be over dyed with indigo. So the great thing about over dye is you can put a lot of different colors together, and they're not going to look the same when they're done, but they're all going to go together. So this dress looked pretty awful before I dyed it. I mean, purple, that mustard yellow and orange, I mean, wasn't the best combo. But I knew that once it was all dyed with indigo, that it would work. Okay. And now I have to figure out how to stop sharing. Go back to Zoom. Where is it?
Well, while you're doing that, Julianne, maybe I'll ask a
Yes.
question. So getting back to your thing of why would you dye? So I bought a bunch of fabric, you know, that it's really not the best color for me. So I want to dye it to have it be in my better color range.
Right.
So one of the things I do paint, so I know about mixing colors for paint, but I'm not sure, like on that dress you dyed, how do you have, or is there someplace a chart for when the fabric is a certain color and you dye it this color, kind of how is it going to come out? Because a lot of my fabrics that I want to dye are maybe a little brown or a little taupe, and I'm just thinking with brown and anything else, it's always just going to come out gray.
Right. So their color mixing knowledge is helpful. Kind of the basic rules still apply. So if you mix complementary colors with each other, they cancel each other out, right? And you get brown.
Right.
And sometimes you get a nice brown, and sometimes you get something that you never really want to see. So it's challenging. And of course, the easy answer is you have to do a sample.
Right,
because every dye strikes a little differently.
Yeah.
And especially when you're dealing with fabric that has been dyed and it already is a color, but it's not your favorite color. Oh gosh, I wish Ruth was here. Every weekend, practically, she takes sweaters that she gets at thrift shops that are beige. I don't know why so many sweaters are beige. And she dyes them with RIT dye. And sometimes they turn out great, and sometimes they don't. They either get splotchy because they're just not absorbing the dye, or the color mix. So whatever dye she put on over it didn't react well with the beige or the gray or light pink. Or I've had things. I dyed a scarf that I bought that was beige and Pepto-Bismol pink stripes. It was a beautiful cashmere scarf. And I'm like, I love this scarf, but I don't like these colors. So I dyed the whole thing with indigo. And it's like green, which I did not expect, you know. So sometimes you get wonderful accidents, and sometimes you get something and you're like, that's a head scratcher.
Okay.
I
did take little pieces of fabric and test them, but you know, I have all those Porcelain MX dyes, and I don't want to, you know, I don't want to waste my precious dyes. So, but I that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Try a little bit. And then the other thing to consider is when you're looking at something, look at it and try and perceive, is it a gray tint to the fabric or a yellow tint to the fabric? And that will give you a clue as to what direction it will go when you over dye it.
Okay.
So if it has a yellow tint and you want to cancel that out, then over dye, don't over dye with purple, use like pure blue, right? Indigo blue, or something that has no hint of a warm shade in it. And that will help counterbalance the warm tones.
Okay, great.
But
All
it
right.
might just turn it brown too. So.
Yeah. Okay, thank
Right?
you.
Okay, so are there other questions? I had heard that somebody was interested in China silk. And my question about that is, did you mean silk habotai, or, you know, the thin silk that's used for lining? Do we know?
Oh, maybe that was me. Yeah, it's habotai.
Habotai, okay, yeah, because sometimes I have seen polyester lining fabric marked, and this was at Walmart, so, you know, marked as China silk, which really kind of is a head scratcher to me. But yeah, silk cabotai is fabulous for lining, and I use it for trim and for making facings on the bias cut garments. So there's a piece right here. It started out like this. This is pre-cut silk ribbon. It's very thin. Can you see? It's just a really thin, soft, semi-translucent when it's white fabric. And you can buy it at Dharma Trading Company in several widths, in both bias cut and straight of grain. But I use the bias for making facings. And here's a piece that I just dyed with a little bit of color hue. And it's pretty. I wasn't trying to make it perfectly even, because what I would like to do is roll it up and dye one end to try and get one end of it a different color. Maybe that will work today, maybe it won't. And then I wanted to show you guys some of my very high-tech, sophisticated dyeing equipment. Like this. So I love these clear plastic containers. I have them in many sizes. So there's the shoebox size. This is the boot box size. And then I will get the bigger ones for like sweater storage and stuff, for doing larger pieces of fabric. They're clear so that I know if they're clean or not. Because how many times have I gotten some stray dye in, and then you get a very, this piece right, this one right here has stray dye in it. So that is going to get washed. I feel like half the time what I do in my dye studio is the dishes. Clean equipment is important. Other things I use, my friends will save them for me, yogurt containers. These are really handy for ice dye and doing demos because you can see through them. Glass jars. So, okay, so for the color hue, anybody want to, let me just show you what those dyes look like. Grab it here. There's more high-tech equipment. So with color hue, these little droppers are really helpful because the color hue dye, has anybody used this before? It comes liquid form, which is great. So anything that's shelf staple at liquid form, it's kind of a pain to ship it this way, but it means you don't have to deal with getting powder into liquid. And one thing I will say about fiber reactive dyes, if you are going to mix them with liquid, so you're not doing ice dye, which is a straight powder, you're going to put it in a bottle, mix it first in a small cup, little yogurt container or cheese, something, with the tiniest bit of liquid. Like you have a teaspoon of dye, you use tablespoon or teaspoon of liquid into a paste, and that will make it easier to get it liquid form. Otherwise it's lumpy and it's just a pain. Paste first. Trust me on this. Okay, I saw a question about what's the difference between a mechanical dye and a chemical dye. Not being a chemist, so I will try and answer. So chemical dyes, like fiber reactive dyes, react with the fiber and the dye makes a new chemical bond with the fiber. Mechanical dyes like indigo, you use a process to get the dye into the fabric and it goes in, and then you use another process to kind of like you open the fibers with the I can't remember the exact name of what it's called. It will come to me later. Sorry. It's like a lock and key. You're opening the fabric and letting the indigo become soluble. So indigo is not soluble in its natural form. It has to be reduced and with the indigo vat, and it uses various chemicals to get the oxygen out of the vat. And so the oxygen is kind of your lock and key. So when you put your fabric into the indigo vat, which has the oxygen has been chemically removed from it, the dye can penetrate using the water as a vehicle, can penetrate into the fabric. And then when it comes out of the vat, if you've ever done it, it comes out of the vat looking kind of yellow or green. And then as it oxidizes, the oxygen goes back in, and that's closing the lock closed, holding the indigo in the fabric. So the indigo is held in, instead of chemically being bonded with the fiber, it's held in with this lock and key process, which is amazing. It allows indigo to dye any fiber that can have the water penetrate into it, but it also fades because it's only held through this mechanical process. Did that answer the question? Hopefully. Yeah. Okay. So then I'm going to use a little bit of this emerald green, and just going to get a little bit of it into my dropper here. And that's probably more than we really need to dye this little bit of silk, but get some water.
Julianne, does Dharma
Yes.
Trading Company still have that big, beautiful store in the Bay Area?
They have in San Rafael. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Great place to buy yarn too. Fantastic. Which they don't have on their website, but they have yarn you can dye on their website, but in the shop, you can all kinds of amazing knitting stuff.
They also had a lot of blanks that you could dye.
Yes. They sell.
T-shirts and dresses and silks and cottons.
So I just clean out my little squeegee thing with water. All right, so now I have some green dye in this cup here. And I am going to just take this piece in. Now, normally, what did I say? I said you always have to pre-wet the fabric. But for this ribbon, I don't want it to be solid color. I want just the edge. So I'm just going to dip the edge in. We're going to let it kind of wick up a little bit. And you can see,
Do you do much ombre? I know that that's kind of is that something you do quite often?
I do it a little bit.
A little bit, okay.
I've been experimenting more with ombre with painting the dye on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which is because then you have a lot more control. Dipping fabrics is tricky.
Yeah.
Okay. So the other thing that and he told me that you guys are going to do a dye day, which sounds super fun. And if I can come, I certainly will. But one of the things to consider is how many different types of dye you want to do. I wouldn't recommend indigo, but I think you can certainly play around with low water immersion fiber reactive dyes on silks and wools, and then also this the color hue if you want to play with that. Okay, so here you can see the color. It's pretty bright green and fun. So this color hue dye, there's still a fair amount of dye in there. I don't want to waste it. So I'm going to take this other piece of fabric that I have, because I'm going to try and dye this the other side. So I have a piece of half yard. It's a half yard of silk and I had it wet. This is just the silk habitat that they sell at Dharma. Oh, you can get it anywhere really. Okay. And I think I'm just going to stick it in this cup. To use up all of that dye. So one of the great things about color hue, it's kind of expensive. So a lot of people say, oh, really? But did you see, I mean, I just use this tiny little bit of dye in that dropper. And here it is. And
What's this fabric, Julianne?
This is silk, China, or silk habitat, or sometimes called China silk.
And
Oh,
did you buy,
so
do you
the
buy,
piece, the strip that you had rolled up to do the edge, you just have another piece here that you're doing.
Yes, it's just
I
a
see,
piece
okay.
of yardage. And actually I can, because see, there's still color in here. I'm going to go find another piece of silk because I hate wasting I hate wasting the dye. So often I'll have several pieces around. And so like if a group of you are dyeing it, you can have different buckets with different colors and you can just go take your piece and go, I think I'll put a little pink on this one and, dip an edge in the pink or something.
and where do you buy your color hue? At
So
Dharma?
Dharma has it, and also Jeannie Ecke, I think I have her name listed as well. She sells, if you want to buy large quantities, I would email her. You can buy it in these little bottles. They have a starter set with even smaller than this. This is ½ ounce. And then you can also get this larger size, which if a group of you are going to do it, I would get the larger size, which are 8 ounces. And I think these are like $25 to $30 per color. So like,
Oh, wow.
they're not cheap, but I mean, I've had these for years. So
I notice your fingers aren't turning green. I mean, first I was gonna say no gloves, but your fingers aren't turning
gloves.
green.
well, you probably should wear gloves. But the thing about the color is the dyes that are for silk and wool is, remember, they're a little more acidic. Our skin also prefers an acidic environment. So if you stick your hands in dye for silk and wool that has a little vinegar or something in it, yeah, they're going to turn color, and your fingernails might be dyed for a week, but your hands, it will wash off and it doesn't do any damage. I would not, and I have done this, I've had blue hands, but I try not to stick my hands right in my indigo vat, even when I'm using a natural vat, because it's high pH and that's just a little harsher. It's more like, so, okay, so you can see, I just scrunched that fabric in there. I just want to show you what this is. It would be like the low water immersion technique is you just crumple up the fabric and stick it in the dye, right? So you can see it is not even. If I wanted this to be even, what you do is you use a larger container and more water. And kind of get it wet first and let it really sit in there and move it around a little bit, squish it around, and just make sure that the dye is penetrating all the way through. And since I've already got it modeled, I'm going to see, do I not have any blue? Oh, I have a little.
Julianne, I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but are we using purified water? Does it matter?
I think if your water has high iron content, like it comes out orange, you might want to consider not using it. Get water from a friend or get some distilled water. But normally you would not need to use anything other than your own tap water. Okay, so I have some green here. Apparently I'm almost out of colors. I let a friend of mine use my colors and I don't have a lot left. There's a little purple.
When you did the low water immersion in that cup, Did you wet the silk first or was it dry when you bunched it up?
It was wet. So, and that's a really good question because you can get resist by having the fabric dry. So
trial garments, but
so this one went in dry,
like it.
and that meant that the dye didn't completely penetrate where I didn't soak it.
Copy off a new pattern for what I'm going to use the plaid for. So it's been,
Hi, everybody. Someone's talking in the background. They're not muted. Can you check and make sure your microphone is muted?
I'm just going to see about getting another color on this piece. I'm just going to put a little bit of.
so this is working out really, really well.
If you have some dye left over, you've mixed a batch and you really like the color and but you've got some left over, do you ever keep it over to, let's say you don't have time to finish? Can you keep it over?
Yes. So if it's the color hue, I just put it in another, I just put it in something and seal it up so it doesn't dry out. If it's fiber reactive dye though, and it's got the soda ash mixed in it, you got to use it.
Okay.
Or it's done. And the great thing about fiber reactive dye is once it's done all its reacting with either the water or in your fabric, you can pour it on your garden. It's done its reacting. I don't pour it down a sink because it can be stainy. I just pour it somewhere, not directly on a plant, but just in the garden somewhere.
Okay, and the Jacquard acid dyes, they're fiber reactive. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Well,
I got a question.
acid dyes are designed to react with silk and wool.
Wool. Okay.
There was a question earlier about dyeing pantyhose.
Nylons can be dyed with any dyes that work on silk and wool. Will work on nylon as well.
Interesting.
Which is weird, but nevertheless true. Okay, so I've got a little bit of this one that's called eggplant from the color hue. They call it eggplant, this color. And it's kind of a weird color. It's like a raisiny color. But I have it, so I'm going to try it with this green and see if I can't get this ribbon, the other side, to have a little bit of a different color. So let's see how that's going. And I think I'll just let that sit here. I think I used too much water. So, all right. So now let's see the green. So here's the tub with, I put a little bit more green in here and more water to try and see if I can get it more even. Probably not, since it's, well, a little bit. It's darker, but it's still not even. And that's probably just a result of the first time it went in, this being scrunched up. So the more even you want your dye to be, the more you want the fabric to be moving in the dye. And that means more water for even color. So the less even, you can do the low water immersion technique and just scrunch it up. You can also fold, pleat, twist, do plan things like tie-dye or shibori techniques to reduce the volume of fabric that's being attached, that's being available for the dye. And that will give you even color where the fabric is exposed. And it allow you to do different things.
So Julianne, if you
Yes.
were dyeing, let's use that sample that you're doing there with the green.
Mhm.
So you did your initial immersion, it's splotchy, looking a little tie-dyed. Now you've moved it to a slightly larger tub and you're giving it another go round.
Mhm.
If it, could you still eventually end up with getting that fabric to be evenly dyed, or is it sort of, because of the progression of how it was approached right initially at the beginning, it's always going to have that little bit of uneven color?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And no matter how many times you could get it fully saturated with color, and then it will, if you get it fully saturated, I mean, there is no more room for any other dye to get in there. It will look pretty even. But as you can see, when I did the second go around, the parts that were initially light green are now a darker green. And then the white parts are lighter green. So is it more even? Yes, but it's not even, right? It's, so that's the thing about dye is, and color hue specifically is like a watercolor. If you've ever played with watercolor, you lay a wash down, and then if you put more on, it's just another layer on top. They're translucent layers on top of each other.
Right. So if the fabric takes the color in a slightly uneven way, it's just always going to continue that process. Like you said,
Yes.
if it
Yeah.
took the green first, it'll go darker and darker and darker, but where it
Right.
stayed white, it's going to stay behind the curve. Okay.
Yeah. So,
But if
and
you-
I can go grab another piece of fabric and do it in a more even way in this tub. I was a little overexcited about squishing it in the little cup, but I think it would be illustrative to see if I can get it more even with just this size container, which I think I can. Often I use patience instead of precision, or, really good dye techniques. Color hue is great in that you can just keep layering the color on, like I said, until the piece is fully saturated. And often my favorite pieces are the ones that when I first dyed them, I was just like, this is not working out. So I kept redoing it and layering the color on over and over. And because it's translucent, it just keeps layering one on top of another, which is, I think, really pretty. So I'm just going to grab another piece real quick. Okay, real quick. Give you guys a nice view of something interesting to look at.
Julianne, I have to ask about the container that's marked avocado pits behind your head.
Oh yeah, friends of mine. So here's a little bit about my dye studio. Here is a little crazy, and you can see indigo samples over there. But yeah, a friend of mine collects avocado pits and gives them to me, and they can be used to give. It's a fair amount of work to get the color out of them, but it's a really pretty soft orangey pink. It's really pretty.
Oh.
And natural dyes are a whole nother universe of fun and games. And you have to kind of suspend your desire for this color on this fabric, because it just takes years of practice to get consistent color at all, let alone getting a color that is the color you wanted to start with. It is doable, but it's a lot of work. When I see fabric that has been dyed naturally and I like it, I spend the money because I know how hard it is.
So
Yeah.
I have a batch of lichen, or no, is it lichen? No, it's moss or something. Anyway, I have it brewing. It's been brewing for a while, and I keep thinking of doing the dyeing, but when I dye, I have to add a fixative after I put the fabric in it, right? For
Yes.
natural dyes? Okay.
Well, yeah, natural dyes almost always require a mordant.
Mordant, that's it, yeah.
Yeah, some dyes you can do with silk. If the dye has tannin in it, and some natural dyes have tannin in them, you can do like an acid dye process, which is where you add in vinegar or citric acid and cook it for just half an hour. Without pre-mordanting, you can get color on silk and wool. But almost always you're going to get better results, better light fastness, fade fastness with doing a mordant first.
Okay.
Yeah. And the thing about the mordant is mordants, people will say a lot of things are mordants. If it's not metal, it's not a mordant.
Okay.
It's an assist.
Okay.
And you can, aluminum sulfate is the most common mordant used. You don't use chrome. That's not healthy. But iron, copper, and aluminum all make great mordants. And tannin is an assist. Salt is an assist. Yeah, it's a whole nother world. Fascinating and fabulous. And if you want to learn about natural dyes, I highly, highly recommend the online classes done by Maiwa, which is MAIWA. And I'm sure it's on your handout list. They have been doing online classes and they're excellent. I did a 3 months indigo study with them, and it was fabulous. I learned so much, and I've been studying indigo for over 10 years. They've just got their online setup done so well. It's so, maybe I'll try the eggplant just for something different. Okay, let's get rid of this. Okay, so I have my piece of white. This is another little piece of just white silk habitai. I'm going to have a lot of this fabric. I am going to use this eggplant, and there's not a lot left, so I'm just going to pour some in here. And I want you to see what the dye looks like before I put the fabric in and then after. So the other thing about color hue is you can pretty much keep sticking fabric in there until the water runs clear. So I put some water in this tub, not a lot, but you can see it looks pretty dark there. I think I'm going to put a little more water in just so the fabric can really move. Let's see if I can turn this up a little bit. Try and switch it. Okay. Nope, that's not going to work either. Okay, I'll just hold it up. All right, so then the other thing about dyeing, if you want to get even, so you've got your pot of dye. Okay. You've got your container of dye. I'm going to try and hold with one hand. Okay, come on. Okay. So here's the container. So if you hold your fabric up with one hand and you introduce it into the container, and then I'm going to set it down just so I can use my other hand on one end. And what I'm trying to do is to get the fabric to go into the liquid without it folding on top of itself, so that it all gets introduced to the dye evenly. And so like if you're doing your dye day, you can help each other with holding the fabric over your solution and get it introduced in an even way. Oh, this looked great. Oh, this worked great. Ha ha. The thing about color hue is it's instant set. So you get to see your results right away. So see how much more even that is? There's even color all the way through the piece. And
Nice, I like that.
the only thing I did differently was I used a bigger container, and instead of squishing it in, I introduced the fabric, and I'm going to put it right back in. So because there's still plenty of dye here, I'll show you. There's still plenty of dye in this container. So it's soaked up like a third of it, but there's still plenty more. So Dharma Trading Company, if you don't want to dye fabric, they also sell scarves, and they have silk and rayon scarves, which are super fun to play with. Okay. All right.
Julianne, when
Yes.
fabric dries, it's gonna be somewhat lighter.
Yes, it will absolutely be lighter. So if you want a really intense dye, don't stop until it's so dark. You're like, oh my God, that's so dark. It's impossible. Because then when it dries, you'll like it.
Okay.
So when you say don't stop, you're saying just leave it sit in the tub and let it soak.
Yep. Yeah. And with the color hue, you can let it soak until like when you pull it out and you squeeze it out, that there's, you see, it's still, and now it's even lighter, right? So more fabric has more color has gone into the fabric. So the fabric's darker, the water is lighter. Just keep.
Right. And so is there a point where you could say, oh, this isn't as dark as I would like it to be, and you just pour in more dye? Or do you
Right,
start
but-
over?
Yeah, you can put in more dye. So with the color hue, this is not true with other, well, that's not true. Many pieces get over dyed more than once because the first time through you're just like, it's not quite dark enough. So do it again, either in the same color or it's an opportunity to resist some of the pattern, fold it or pleat it and have some of it stay that original color. And then you can over dye it and get another color, get another pattern going. So it's an opportunity, not a mistake, right? But the thing about the color hue is because it's instant set, you can see what you're getting right away. So if you don't like it, that's an opportunity to get something different.
Well, this is not a very good. So whatever she's doing.
We also have a question about salt. What
She
are
was
you
not,
referring
she was
to?
doing a
Table
whole bunch
salt
of
or rock
stuff.
salt?
I didn't even ever looking up. She was just going to use the word here.
We have a gentleman
can't see
talking
what
in the
she's
background.
doing.
Can we please mute?
All
I
you
think
see is
that's
her looking
Bonnie.
down. Like
Is it
that.
Bonnie?
What she's doing is
Bonnie?
now.
Kathy, why don't you just mute everybody? You can do that.
Okay, I'm going to mute everybody and then you guys come back in to talk.
You have to unmute yourself,
You have to
Julianne.
There we go. Okay.
there we are.
So the question about salt is there are silk painting techniques that use salt. And in that sense, in that case, it would be a difference between rock salt or table salt or any kind of salt. And it's the size of the crystal. And one of the things that the salt does is it draws the liquid towards it. And so it can create an interesting pattern on the fabric. And so that's how salt is used in silk painting or direct dye applications. You can paint with dye, and you can also dye with paint. This vest that I am wearing, I can stand back a little further. So the vest that I am wearing, I painted it, and I used Flow, which you would think I was working for Jacquard the way I'm hawking their products. This is Dynaflow, and it comes in a lot of different colors. You can also mix it. It's liquid, and you can also get it in the bigger containers. If your niece gives you a t-shirt that's 50 poly and 50 cotton and says it's not black enough for me, this is what you use. Because because it's a blend. Sometimes with blends, you got to go for, and I didn't want to do a whole tub with Rit dye. So I used Dynaflow, which is a paint that's heat set, but you can thin it out so that it's so thin, it doesn't affect the hand of the fabric. But anyway, that's not what the question was. It was about salt. So in anything other than a painting technique or direct dye application technique, salt is mixed into the water, and it works as an assist by making the water more capable of getting into the fabric. My friend who's a former chemistry teacher says it makes the water wetter, which
I think that the question was, should you use rock salt or regular table salt?
right. So it doesn't matter unless you're using a direct dye application technique.
Okay.
Yeah. I would use whatever dissolved quicker. So. Okay, so what other questions are there? Because I've kind of.
And remember, you may have to unmute yourself if you want to talk.
Look at the chat. Garment group, okay.
I think we've got most of the questions covered.
Oh, good. And I'm not sure if I went over time or not. No, okay, so
You're
far so
fine.
good.
You're fine.
Actually, I have a question.
Good.
Using the Rit dye, it comes in its packet. You want to do a small amount. Can you just go ahead and use a little bit of the packet and save the rest
Yes.
for another time?
Yeah, in both the powder form and the liquid form. Is it
Okay.
a little easier to measure it out in the liquid form? Yes. But the powder form, the great thing about the powder form is if you have a scale, say you have, kitchen scale, you can use a scale, zero it out, and you can just get, like, if it says 2 ounces on the package, you can get just half of it by measuring it and be much more accurate than just trying.
Okay. Thank you.
Some of the fun with dyeing is that it's almost like Christmas. You're never quite sure exactly what you're getting.
So you want to see some examples?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So here's some napkins. And these are done with ice dye, which is like insanely fun. And I think I wrote on my handout that Nick Coman did an article for Threads magazine about ice dye. And he's the one that taught me. So I still use all of his instructions. And when we get together and dye, we learn from each other. But this piece has wax on it, which if you've ever heard about batik method, then wax is used. And I have a bag full of things that need to have the wax removed from it. And one thing I will say about batik, and if you want to try and do it yourself, you can purchase soy wax, which it melts at a lower temperature, so you don't need to get it quite as hot. You can use like just an electric skillet or hot plate type of thing to melt the soy, and then the soy wax, and then you can apply it with a paintbrush, or through a stencil or whatever on your fabric, and let it solidify. And then when you do ice dye, so soy wax doesn't get as hard as beeswax. And one of the things people like about batik is this crackle, you get these kind of lines. If you add ice, you get it cold enough and the soy wax will crack. So you can get very fun batik effects with ice dye and using the soy wax. And why would you use it? Well, one, it's a little bit more environmentally friendly than the kind of wax that comes from petroleum products, which you need to, the paraffin, which you need to mix in with the beeswax, because the beeswax by itself is A, expensive, and B, hard to remove. If you've ever tried to remove wax from fabric, you know that it's challenging. The other reason to use a soy wax is it gets out of your fabric with just hot water and a little soap. It is really easy to remove. So it's kind of a quick and fun way. Let me just show you some other things I have done. I'm going to do a little plug for painting on fabric here. I'm going to switch this. So now you can see my very messy studio. But you see the fabric, this piece here. So this one, here, I'll turn the camera. So it's just a big piece of fabric that I painted the dye on. And I use fiber reactive dyes in squirt bottles with wet fabric hung. I think I hung it, yeah, I hung it from this, this trellis out here outside. But if you can erect some kind of something to hang your fabric on. And paint the dye on it. And it's really fun to watch the way it progresses down. And you get these ombre effects with the dyes. And the dyes split into different colors. So I poured on orange and yellow, but these blends happened in the fabric as it was moving through the fabric. That's my little plug for direct application methods or painting methods versus ombre, which is really hard to do. I know you watch videos and they make it look super easy, but I just find it to be really frustrating. Let's see, I'm going to show you a couple more things. So this piece here is silk knit. And this comes from Dharma. It's a silk jersey and it comes like knitted, a lot of knitted fabrics come in a loop. So this is one that comes in a loop. This is fiber reactive dyes on silk.
Yes.
Instead of acid dyes. And they don't take as strong. You can see the colors are much more muted. It's not real vibrant. So you can use fiber reactive dyes on silk, but they don't quite strike as vibrantly as the dyes that are specific for silk and wool. Okay.
I think the ribbing on this is going to show.
Okay. I wanted to show one other dress. Okay, so this is ice dye here. And I just wanted to show a little bit of what happens when you use a fabric that is a blend of fibers. This is rayon and silk blended. And the dye takes a little bit differently on, so you can see the pattern is woven and with silk and rayon. It's pretty vibrant because rayon loves fiber reactive dye and it just goes crazy. You get really vibrant color. But let me show you this other piece that I did that's a blend. And it is so interesting because, excuse my okay. So this dress here, which many of you may have seen me wear, I ice dyed this fabric. But what I wanted to show, okay, so this is the hemp side of the fabric and this is the silk side of the fabric. And they are dyed the same. So you can see much brighter here. And then the silk side is a little bit more muted. And that's just what happens with those dyes. on that fabric. And then another one that's okay. And then here's another piece that's similar. This is a silk rayon velvet. And so velvet, it has a rayon side and a silk side. So look at the silk side. See how much lighter the silk side is than the rayon. Yeah. All right. I think that's
we've had that one piece soaking in the eggplant dye
Oh,
all this time.
let's take a look. Yeah. Okay, yes. Thank you for reminding me. Here it is in the eggplant. Oh yeah, it took up a lot more color. And if I were to leave this, see how now it's even lighter?
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wow.
And now this habitat is thin fabric, right? It's only going to take so much dye. So it might not take anymore, even if I were to leave it overnight. But I could still use the dye that's in there and get a very pale tint on another piece of fabric.
That's
Another
a
piece.
significantly darker hue than it was initially.
Yes. Yeah. So that's just
Nice.
patience, right? Just more time. And one thing I can do is really get the water out of this. So really squeeze it out, and so that there's less water, but it's still damp. So when I talk about this for ice dye or for any types of thing, damp but not dripping is how wet you want it when you're introducing the fabric to your dye. And I'm going to just put it right back in and see if I can't get any more color out of it, out of this dye pot into the fabric. I tell you what, I spent a week in France learning indigo from the indigo guru. And the most important trick that I learned from him was how to introduce fabric to the dye vat so that I would get even color.
That's kind of important.
Hmm?
That's kind of important.
It is. Well, and with indigo, you have to introduce it without also putting in air, because you've spent a lot of time and effort reducing the air from the vat. So you need to not splash. But when you introduce the fabric on its end like that, and it goes in and you use your other hand with the glove on it under the level of the liquid to kind of pull and push. So you're doing this two-handed thing. It's a way to get it in evenly and also not introduce air. And I will show you the scarf. And I tell you, so look at this beautiful indigo scarf. And the color is perfect all the way through.
Wow.
This is my $5,000 scarf because that's how much that trip cost.
Wow.
It's not the only thing I got, but he did these scarves with us, and he did like 10 of them. Boom, 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 boom. So we also learned how to dye in succession, yeah, to build up color. So you start, like, say you're going to dye 20 things, you want them all to be the same color in your indigo vat. The first one that goes in is going to pull up more indigo than the 20th one, but you usually dye them multiple times. So he said you start at one end, you do all the one time, and then you start at the back. So the last one that went in is the first one for the second, and you just keep going back and forth that way to layer the color on. And he did this as part of a demonstration, and he did 10 scarves, boom, 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 and all 10 of them are that exact same color.
Wow.
What is the fabric what is the scarf fabric?
Linen. It's an open weave linen.
Nice.
Yeah. Also from Maiwa. So Maiwa sells blanks as well. So if you've ever go up to Vancouver, Canada, they have a really nice shop where they sell things that they've had made from artisans in India. And you can buy fabric from them. I've bought some really amazing fabric from them, and they sell blanks on their website. So not only do they have good online content for dyes, they sell natural dyes and they sell blanks.
Julianne, what was the name of the store in Canada, in Vancouver?
It's Vancouver, yeah, Maiwa.
I hope to be there next year. That's why I asked.
Oh, it's fabulous. They have two shops, one where they sell the blanks and one where they sell the finished garments. They're both in Vancouver, BC. And I spent a lot of money at both of them. And you can get fabric. Let's see. Here, I'll just show you guys. I know I'm kind of running out of content, so I'm doing a little dog and pony show here. Here's some of the fabric that I bought from them. And I think it was like 20 Canadian per meter, which is pretty decent for hand dyed. These are hand batiqued and dyed indigo pieces. This is a stitch shibori piece. You can see the needles holes. That's a lot of work. And yeah, 1 meter. This is a thin cotton, so pretty nice for sewing garments. Are there any questions about which kinds of fabric are good to dye, as far as fiber content or for bias cut garments, that kind of thing? I mean, my favorite is rayon challis, mainly because rayon drapes beautifully for bias cut garments, and it's really absorbent, so it takes the dye process beautifully. It
So
doesn't
the
work.
rayon challis, I'm sorry, the rayon challis would be a good, if I wanted to make a bias cut skirt
Mhm,
with indigo dye,
mhm.
rayon challis is going to be my winner.
Rock and roll. I
Okay.
mean, you can dye 10 fabrics with indigo, and the rayon piece, you're going to look at it and go, why did that one look so much better? And it's because the rayon is super absorbent. So it just takes all the dye, and everybody else is just like, wait, what about us? And they get nothing.
So if you want a nice deep dark eggplant,
Well,
go
if
for
you're
that
using,
rayon.
sadly, the rayon doesn't work that well with color hue. Actually,
okay.
you know what? If you guys have a few minutes, I'll just go rip a strip of rayon and I'll show you how it will take the color hue a little, but not as good as the silk.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just go grab a piece of that because it is really illustrative.
I think my brain is on overload.
So while she's doing that, maybe we can talk about our dye day together. I don't know if we have any money. I'll put myself on. If we have any money left over, well, here she comes, to buy different dyes for our dye day. That was the thought.
Oh, that's interesting.
We can discuss that next month, maybe, Annie?
Put it on the agenda.
Yeah. One idea that just popped into my head was that if each one of us bought a color of dye and we had a list of colors so that we don't have, 6 people buying blue dye, that if one person bought one color of dye, then we could bring our own, some of our own supplies. And that's just an idea.
Yeah, I was just using it to fill time. I was just thinking.
Sure. Oh, no, it's a good discussion to have because I've been thinking
And
about this.
one of the things Julianne mentioned was that Dharma sells a color kit. So it could be that we just buy the one kit, everybody contributes, $5, whatever. And then we've got a selection of colors and we can kind of see what's in that kit. So yeah, let me put together some some options. And if anybody thinks of anything, email it to me. And then at our May meeting, we can address that and try to get everything put together for the June meeting.
And I've worked with Dharma in the past, and they're very good to work with. And they may help us come up with a specific, you know, a kit that will
Yeah.
work for what we're trying to do.
Okay.
Okay.
They have various kits, like party packs for doing tie-dye parties. And that's for the fiber reactive dye, and it like you get like gloves and aprons and the soda ash and some colors of fiber reactive dyes. So that can be a way to go if you wanted to play around with tie-dye, low water immersion, or ice dye, that you would use the same stuff mostly
Right.
for any of
right.
those techniques. And then the color hue kit that they have is pretty tiny. It's like everybody could do maybe one scarf. But you know, so
That may
here,
be enough. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
that might be enough to give you an idea about it. So here's that ribbon. So it's got the green on one edge and the eggplant on the other. I'm pretty happy.
This is
with-
the one that you were dipping at the beginning.
Yeah, I just rolled it up into a little thing and dipped it in.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's how that one looks. That's pretty cool. I'll show you one of the other. You're seeing my studio in all of its messy glory, but some of my favorite.
Creative glory, not
things.
messy
Yeah.
glory.
Yeah. So if you've ever seen these hanging things for like,
Yes.
I don't know, I guess it's to store a million scarves in your closet. Those are really handy to have as like a little quickie drying rack.
Couldn't get those at Daiso.
Yeah, Daiso. I love Daiso.
Are they wonderful?
Okay, so here's that purple fabric. I'm gonna take it out. Let's see what we can do. Okay, so what I grabbed was, I'm gonna use this cup because it has a fair amount of dye in it. I've got a strip here of a fabric that is, it's they call it burnout fabric. Do you know what burnout is? Have you ever seen those scarves that have that pattern? So they sell fabric for making your own burnout because we love to have fun with chemicals, right? And what it is it's a satin weave, and it has rayon as the satin float side, and then the silk is the backing side. And I think the chemical they use etches away the rayon and it leaves the silk behind when you do burnout techniques. But I just like this fabric to dye because it's kind of like a two-sided monster, right? I'm just going to do a little small sample so we can see intensity. And I'm going to put it in the little cup.
Julianne, where do you get your favorite rayon fabric to dye? Or is this your favorite rayon fabric to dye?
From Dharma. So the rayon challis, which is all rayon, and I just, when I went over to grab some, it wasn't readily available, so I grabbed this piece instead. And I grabbed another piece of rayon crepe. But Dharma is great. And then I also, my friend Nick Coman and I don't know why, but for some reason we got a wild hair, and we imported from Indonesia, I don't know, 100 meters or whatever of heavy rayon crepe. And that's that piece that I showed where it was painted, and it's really beautiful fabric. I have a lot of it. It takes dye beautifully. I mean, just gorgeous colors. And I have 2 big rolls of it. And I will tell you, the friends and family price of undyed fabric is $10 a yard. So if your group wants to buy some of this, and it's pretty wide, but it's not like the rayon challis from Dharma is pretty lightweight. This stuff is heavier weight, so it's more skirt, jacket, not really summer dress weight. But Dharma has lots of fabrics. They have rayon crepe, they have rayon challis. They have this stuff that they call burnout fabric, which is half rayon, half silk. So you can see it's not quite as intense. Here, let's try the other one that's all round. It did better than I thought it was going to. Let's try this other piece. Is there anybody interested in dyeing wool?
Yeah, I'm planning to dye wool with that moss.
Oh, with the lichen, yeah. So natural fibers, oh, it'll be gorgeous. Do you know what color it's going to be?
Yeah, it should come out kind of a raspberry.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is 100% rayon crepe here. And oh yeah, I can just tell, see how it just does not take the color quite the same.
I like to dye hand spun wool yarn.
Wool yarn, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and you managed to do it without felting it?
Yep.
Do you paint the dye on?
I do a squirt bottle
Uh-huh, yeah, squirt it,
And
and
that
then wrap it up and
and steam it.
steam it or microwave.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been experimenting a bit with microwave instead of a steamer, because a steamer uses a lot more energy. And I get tired of buying the natural gas bottles. If you have a heat gun, so do you know what just a thermometer
Right.
type of thing, you can use your microwave. And what you need is, if you're interested, so
Yeah.
a box with some wool blankets in it, or maybe an electric blanket. And what you do is you wrap up your piece in plastic so that everything stays contained, like a a couple minutes until you're up to the temperature that you would normally do for steaming. Take it out, put it in the wool blanket or heated, the box with I think a heating pad or something to keep the temperature up, and keep checking it like every half hour. You probably only need to stick it back in the microwave for a minute every half hour, back and forth. And you can keep the temp up like you were steaming without using all that energy.
Oh my God. Ah,
I know. I read this blog post about it and I was like, oh my gosh, mind blown. And so I've been doing some experiments, and you do have to keep track of the temperature, because you can get it over hot very quickly. And you don't want it to cool too much. You want to keep up the temp so it will do what it needs to do. But yeah, I mean, okay, so here you can see this is pure rayon. This is the blend. And then you saw the piece that was all silk.
Wow.
Okay, so
Right on.
there's your
Yeah.
difference.
But I thought you said rayon was your favorite.
It is, but not for color hue.
Oh.
So this is the color hue dye, which is silk and wool, but mostly silk. It really doesn't do very well on wool either.
Okay. What do you use? What is your favorite dye on rayon then?
So for rayon, it's the fiber reactive dyes. So that's the Procyon MX dyes.
Okay.
And they're just not, I can't do this demo with the and here you can see it happening, right?
Right.
It takes more time to dye with those.
Okay.
Yeah,
I just misunderstood. I thought, yeah, but
and I'm sorry, I wasn't clear either.
No, that's fine.
So
And
Julianne, do you have?
how about bamboo? What do you like with what?
So bamboo, technically it should not be labeled bamboo, but bamboo is rayon almost always, unless it looks and feels like linen or jute. It's not. They're not spinning with the fibers inside the grass fibers inside the bamboo. They are actually breaking it down into its cellulosic components, which is the same way that rayon is made. And so it's broken down through chemical process into like cellulosic goo and then extruded.
Okay, so
That's
it would be an MX.
It's the same as rayon. Yeah, MX dyes. Yeah, same as rayon.
You have a bottle or container of the fabric reactive dye that you're talking about? So I can
Yes,
just
let
see
me,
what
let
it
me
looks
grab
like.
it. Yes, yes, that's a good question. I have, here I'll, you can see, my, studio that, this is what happens when you have a few years of not having people coming into your studio to work. So here's all the colors I have up here. And they're kind of in, they come, if you buy the little kit, they're smaller than this, but usually if you go to Dharma, you can buy this size in all of their colors. If it's a color you're going to use a lot, I mean, with ice dye, you use a lot of dye. So we get the 8-ounce size for those. I usually buy the Dharma brand instead of the Procyon MX brand, but they're pretty much the same. Actually, I might have some in here. These are the really little.
Is the Dharma
Yes.
brand cheaper?
A little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. And at Dharma, they have more colors of the Dharma brand.
Okay.
There's also this other company, Pro Chemical and Dye. And they have a lot of colors. Ice dyers get a few mixes from them that Dharma doesn't have. If you have questions about ice dye, I can try and answer those.
I have a question about color. Can you blend some of these dyes if they don't have the shade you're looking for?
Absolutely. And absolutely. You can mix when it's wet, you know, and there's a lot of information on Dharma's website about color mixing. It's a bit of an art form. There are books on dyeing fabric, and there's this really great one. Let me see if I have it right at hand. I'm not sure. There's that just shows like color swatch after color swatch and how they got that color.
Oh, cool.
I think it's of course not right at hand. This is the one that's Color by Accident, which is all about low water immersion. And she has a little bit about color mixing in here, but she wrote a second book, the same author, called Color by Design. And instead of accident, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these are some of the fun
Good.
things you can do with low water immersion and layering the fabrics. But the second book, it's Ann Johnston, Color by Design. And if you want fiber reactive dyes on any cellulosic, she has a really great information in there on mixing your colors to get it the way you want it to be.
Huh.
We had one last question.
Okay.
Other than rayon challis, what's your next favorite fabric to dye?
Silk.
Silk. I guess
yeah.
that was probably it.
Yeah. Wool, I mean, I love the way wool takes dyes, especially natural dyes. It just takes care to. The hardest part about dyeing wool, I will say 90% of your effort in dyeing wool is getting it wet, because wool resists getting wet. And anybody
Yeah.
who's dyed wool, you know, getting it saturated is the trickiest thing. You think it's all great, it's looking great, and then you realize it's only saturated the tiny surface of the fabric, and it's very frustrating. So the reason why I love rayon is because it's so absorbent that, you know, you just kind of throw the dye at it and it goes in.
Okay.
Silk and wool are a little trickier. Oh, and linen, I love linen, but that's just because I love linen. So.
Yeah. All right, Julianne, thank you so much. This was just a fabulous, fabulous session.
A lot of information to take in. Oh my
Oh.
gosh.
Yeah,
Mhm.
sorry.
No, that's all right.
No,
That's all right. It's just going to take a little time to process it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This was wonderful.
Thanks.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much. I'm going to stop the recording now.
Okay.